Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by the National Association of Landscape Professionals, dealing with the coronavirus in your landscape or lawn care business. This is part of our series of weekly webinars to help companies deal with the rapidly evolving situation. Today's webinar is presented by a panel of NALP experts. We will be taking your questions after each short presentation, so feel free to type them in as you are hearing each presenter. My name is Amy Easterday, and I will be the moderator. Before we get started, here are a few tips. First, we encourage you to ask questions. To do this, you will see a gray bar titled Questions in your GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. Below that is a white box allowing you to enter a question for staff. We will do our best to have as many questions as possible read to each presenter. If your question is not addressed, we will forward it to the appropriate person who will get back with you. The audience will be muted for this webinar. If for some reason you are having any technical difficulties during the presentation, please know that this webinar will be recorded and posted to the coronavirus resource page on our website later today. And now for the first presenter, Whitney Brown, NALP HR and Legal Advisor.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Amy and Cheryl, and NALP members and organizers both for having me here. I wanted to talk about the HR and legal issues that employers are facing relative to the coronavirus outbreak. The first question up is, as a matter of current federal employment law, must employers permit employees to work from home as a result of that COVID-19, if they have a COVID-19 diagnosis? So the short answer to that is no. Let me back up and say, I'm only speaking to federal law today. You should obviously consider your jurisdiction's own laws. Many jurisdictions have for instance, disability laws that define disability more broadly than under federal law. And that'll be the case at a variety of other points where state laws may have different rules. And due to time and other constraints, I can only speak to federal law today. So under the federal ADA, a COVID-19 diagnosis would not be a disability under the ADA. And so someone, to be entitled to a reasonable accommodation, they have to have a disability. However, certain disabled employees may have their condition exacerbated by contracting COVID-19, and those employees may be entitled to a disability accommodation. Always remember, when it comes to providing someone with an accommodation for any disability, or considering what is and is not reasonable for your workplace, that's always an individualized case-by-case assessment, both as to whether or not the employee is actually someone with a disability, and more importantly, as to what is reasonable under current business conditions. And so, as we, I think, are all experiencing, business conditions can be subject to change, and what might have been reasonable 2 weeks ago may no longer be reasonable. Similarly, business conditions have forced many employers, as we'll discuss a bit later, to vastly expand telework, so that things that might have been unreasonable on a one-off basis as exceptionally costly 2 weeks ago, now that we're having to do it at broad scale, those things become reasonable. So always remember to keep that case by case. The most, from the CDC and OSHA and all corners, we are hearing that employers need to permit employees to work from home. So as a matter of current federal employment law, what should an employer consider prior to instituting a work from home program? One, you have wage and hour concerns, particularly with respect to your non-exempt workforce. Non-exempt typically means hourly, but I know that you guys probably have some non-exempt workers who are paid on other bases. But non-exempt workers are paid for time actually worked. So it is very important that we're always communicating to non-exempt employees working remotely that they must report all time worked. It's important similarly that if we get an email from them, at 9:30 at night when we weren't expecting to hear from them, and those are not the particular hours we told them to work, that we ask them how long they worked and constructing that email, pay them for that, and then reiterate to them up to and including the point of disciplining them, for working at an inappropriate time. Those of you with state meal and rest break requirements, ensure that employees are getting communications that they are expected to follow that at home. If an employee does incur overtime, just as you would, if they were working at the office, that can be a disciplinary matter, but the pay cannot be withheld on that basis. Clearly communicate to the workforce that you are not setting an ongoing entitlement, that this is something particular to the exceptional times that we are in. You want to apply work at home arrangements in a non-discriminatory way. Now, this does not mean that everyone in every position gets to work from home. It simply means that in identifying the individuals who are going to be permitted to work from home, that only business justifications are used. So for instance, a large part of that employee's workload can be performed at home. Other things to consider, if you have employees taking payment and credit card information, how will that be encrypted? Communicating to employees, the rules they should follow, telling them specifically, even if it's already part of an existing policy, hey, don't save stuff to your personal laptop, to your personal desktop. Keep everything on the VPN. Don't send things to your personal email address just because you're working from home. Force employees to have strong passwords. I just registered for a quasi-governmental association recently, and my automatic password was generated by entirely public information about me, my membership ID and my initials. So if you have a program for where you're signing employees up, for VPN accounts or expanding their email access, and there's some sort of automatic generated password that's discernible, make sure that employees are changing that to strong and unpredictable passwords. Give employees phishing education, and that's phishing, so that they are not clicking on fraudulent links that appear to be coming from customers, banks, etc., that are not. You can go very high end with this. There are companies that will do third-party instruction up to and including sending test emails to your workforce. A lot of us are not in a time or financial position to do that right now, but those organizations do exist. Finally, consider cybersecurity insurance, especially if you're about to make a large number of your workers remote workers. On to the next slide. I've got some model text here to incorporate in written communications for work from home arrangements. Now, this is just something to be inserted in, a more customized letter or agreement that reflects all those considerations that we've just discussed, what the employee is actually expected to do, when they're expected to do it, any work functions that aren't able to be performed remotely, security considerations, etc. But to help make it clear that this is not a concession on the part of the employer, that work at home is an ongoing reasonable accommodation, we recommend that you use language like this in your work from home agreements with your employees. Next question. As a matter of current federal law, what should an employer consider if they are facing an economic downturn? And of course, none of us want to be here, but we may very well end up here. If you are looking at reducing hours in work, so for your non-exempt employees, this is pretty straightforward. They only have to be paid for their hours worked. For exempt employees, you generally have to keep them at the same salary. And of course, if you are going to claim that someone is exempt, you always have to pay them at the minimum federal and any applicable state threshold. So the federal threshold is $684 a week. Now, if you, in your business judgment, make the assessment that there is a long-term negative impact to your business, you can do a reorganization. You can do an across-the-board cut. And, if you do a reorganization, you can say, we're reorganizing duties and I'm adjusting, giving you new job titles, I'm adjusting your pay accordingly. You can do across the board cuts, again, mindful of that $684 threshold that needs to be met. Again, those do need to be done in consultation with Labor Council because the DOL, Department of Labor, can take sort of a hard look at those. And we want to be sure that communications about those are consistent and not likely to raise red flags. And we also want to make sure that we identified and articulated, again, a long-term, good faith reason why we think that the reorganization is necessary or a pay cut is necessary. It can't be a week-to-week determination where we're constantly fluctuating exempt employees' weekly salary. Be aware of WARN, federal WARN, and any state mini WARN Act triggers that might affect you. In general, this will apply to you on the federal level if you have 100 or more full-time workers, or stating this very roughly, you've got 100 or more workers performing the equivalent of 100 full-time employees, or 4,000 hours a week, and you've got a plant shutdown or a group termination, layoff event where you are substantially impacting the work of 50 or more employees. That's the trigger you need to look for to say, I need to talk with Labor Council right now to see if I am required to give all the notices under the Federal WARN Act. If you do find yourself in a layoff situation where certain employees will be kept and certain employees will not, you may want to consider having an attorney analyze that and or guide you on the evaluative procedures that will be implemented to keep employees. In your communications, be decisive, be realistic, and do try not to be hurtful. Finally, let me wrap up with what is going on with this Families First Coronavirus Response Act. This is one of many pieces of legislation currently being discussed in the media. It's the one that most directly impacts employers and employees. It was passed by the House on Saturday night. On Monday, there was an amendments, so-called technical amendments bill passed that actually substantially changed the act. The key provisions of both are that these only apply to employers with fewer than 50 employees. The effective date is not later than 15 days after the enactment. So after you see the news that President Trump has signed this package into law, and remember, it's not passed the Senate, it doesn't have his signature, so this is all only what's pending before the Senate. When you get that notice, you'll have probably 15 days to prepare. And these have an automatic self-destruct clause of December 31st, 2020. There's two key provisions for employers to be aware of. One is the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. So this is only for employees who are unable to work in telework because their child has been impacted by a child care or school closure related to the COVID-19 health emergency. Importantly, unlike the other forms of FMLA, an employee is eligible once they've been on the payroll for 30 days, and there is no minimum hours worked requirement. They do not have to be full-time. It's a 12-week entitlement. The first 10 days are unpaid, but likely to be covered by the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, which I'll discuss next. Subsequent days are paid at 2/3 the employee's regular rate of pay, up to a cap of $200 per day and $10,000 in the aggregate. The Secretary of Labor may issue regulations that would exempt businesses of fewer than 50 employees if providing this leave would jeopardize the viability of the business as a going concern. Employers of fewer than 50 employees in a 75-mile radius cannot be subject to a civil suit for damages. They could be subject to a civil suit for injunctive relief, in other words, to force an employer to provide the leave, but the employee wouldn't be entitled to damages, but attorney's fees could be awarded there. So be mindful of that. The next key provision of that act for employers is the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. This provides paid sick leave to employees unable to work due to a quarantine or isolation order, a healthcare provider, or symptoms of COVID-19. Those first three reasons relating to the employee's own health, paid leave is due to up to $511 a day, or is capped at $511 a day, $5,110 total. Reasons 4 through 6 relate to an employee who is caring for someone subject to quarantine or isolation, a child care or school closure, or someone experiencing conditions similar to COVID-19. And those employees are due up to 200 a day, 2,000 for the 2-week duration. Full-time employees get 80 hours of paid leave. Part-time employees are entitled to the numbers of hours they work on average over a 2-week period. There's, of course, no carryover here. And importantly, an employer may not require an employee to use any existing paid time off program policy in place of this one or prior to using this one. All right, I will now take any questions from Amy.
Thank you very much, Whitney. We do have a question that came in.
Sure.
What they wanted to know is, if they're not set up as a business to work remotely, no laptops or other technology to do so, what would you recommend? To send people home, to do layoffs?
You know, I think that'd be something that there's so many what ifs there. You know, obviously you can do rotating shift layoffs. You know, you could do a reduction in force style layoff where you're of course with the modifications to unemployment that are part of this bill that we didn't discuss. You know, people are going to be able to collect unemployment more easily. Yeah, I really think that's an individualized discussion that needs to take place based on, you know, how much business you think you've got in the hopper that you can keep and the qualifications of your employees. But we are seeing, another thing I didn't mention, we are seeing some employees relax the use of paid leave. And that is something that you could look at doing, is to allow, you know, if you feel more like you're in a space of uncertainty, you know, you may want to tell people, well, you know, we're going to furlough you for 2 weeks. We're going to enable you to use an extended illness benefit, or, you know, something else that our company policy wouldn't normally permit use of, but we're going to relax the standards in this case.
Thank you, Whitney. Due to time limitations, I'm going to read one more question, but I did want to remind everybody, especially if you're joining in late, we are going to make this entire presentation available on our website following this webinar by the end of the business day. And we also will, even if we can't get to every question, we will be providing those questions to the different presenters, so they will get answered. Whitney, one other question is, does emergency FMLA cover companies with fewer than 50 employees?
Yes, it does. Again, there is the possibility right in the statute that invites the Secretary of Labor to issue a regulation that would exempt businesses of fewer than 50 employees. And then there's also an exception within the statute for businesses of fewer than 25 employees, provided, but that's only to restoration. But you know, as is, it applies to all employers under 500, subject to fitting into one of those two exceptions, one of which is entirely prospective. Thank you all so much for listening. My partner Al Vreeland and I are going to be doing a full hour on this at www.learmiddlebrooks.com tomorrow if you want to go to our site and register there.
Well, oh, thank you so much, Whitney. We appreciate it. We're going to move to the next presenter, which is Sam Steele, the NALP Safety Advisor.
Hello, everybody, and obviously thank you for tuning into our webinar today. Let me make a couple of comments, kind of disclaimers here to begin with. Obviously, this is new and uncharted territory that we're dealing with. Every 10 minutes, it seems like, or every hour, things are changing. So some of the recommendations I make to you may be possible for your firm or your business, and others may not. These are things that you have to decide on your own whether they'll work for you. And I just want to make a comment about what I call the abbreviations that are being thrown around out there. All you have to do is watch the news in the morning, and many of the people that the media are interviewing may get a little short on their presentations and talk about things like PI. If you hear the term PI, that means pharmaceutical intervention. And then they may say NPI, which is non-pharmaceutical intervention. It's easy for me to deal with this because, in fact, there are no pharmaceuticals that are currently effective against COVID-19. So there is no vaccination. It sounds a little bit like back in the day when West Nile virus was first reported in the U.S., which was 21 years ago in 1999. And since that time, there's no vaccine for the West Nile virus yet either, 21 years later. I do keep hearing that we may have some type of a vaccine. They're doing some testing and so forth. So we may have a vaccine. This would be more of a medical question, but there may be a vaccine sooner rather than later. Let's hope for that. So let's deal with the NPIs, the non-pharmaceutical interventions. And the first thing I'm going to talk about here is that second green line that you're seeing there on that PowerPoint in front of you. This involves employees, what employees can do as far as an intervention is concerned. And you're hearing this every several minutes as you watch television or watch coverage of this. They're recommending, first of all, that you stay home when you're not feeling well. The second one is wash your hands more often than normal with warm water and hand soap. And I kind of think there's a really neat little formula here, 2 by 2. Wash your hands twice more often, 2 times more often than you normally would. And also use the wash twice as long as you normally would. I call it 2 by 2. So I think that's a good recommendation for employees if they have access to the hand washing stations or to an area where they can use some type of hand wash or sanitizer. Third bullet says use hand sanitizer gels or wipes when and where available, and hopefully these could also be made available inside vehicles that are used to get employees to and from the job sites. And finally, on this first PowerPoint, wear clean and properly stored personal protective equipment, which is abbreviated PPE, as most of us know, and make sure that you keep it clean. And being properly stored is maybe putting it inside a baggie, a sealable type baggie, and your individual name should be out on the outside of that bag. Say you're using a respirator or protective gloves, protective eyewear, hearing protection. I would not share those with anybody, and I think I'll cover that again on another slide. So I'm ready for the next one. Again, for the employees, these are things you should not do, and I just said this. You should not be sharing PPE such as nuisance masks or respirators. Would also include hearing protectors like earmuffs and earplugs. Would also include things like eye protection. Second bullet is to use a nuisance mask. Do not use a nuisance mask that is dirty or contaminated. Also, do not use a respirator that has not been fit tested to the wearer. And keep in mind that people with facial hair may have a very difficult time getting a good fit of the respirator they're using, so keep that in mind. Fourth bullet is do not use a respirator that has been stored in a potentially dirty environment. In other words, don't use a respirator that's just thrown inside the transport vehicle to and from the job, and it could be picking up the COVID from hard surfaces within the vehicle. And finally, on that PowerPoint, do not use a respirator that is not intended for the assigned work activity. On the next PowerPoint, these are things that employees should do. Keep your respirators clean with warm water and a dish detergent after each use. You should discard nuisance masks, that's these types of dust mask or nuisance masks that are dirty, damaged, or contaminated. Don't try to keep using them if they are dirty, if they become damaged, and they obviously look contaminated. Also, third bullet is keep the mask and the respirators in sealed containers, clearly indicating who the user, the sole user of that PPE or respirator is. Fourth bullet says use a respirator that is designed and engineered for the work activity that you're taking on. Let's say, for example, it would be in some deck construction and you're cutting some masonry block or pavers in those areas. Make sure the respirator is designed for that type of work. And this will also help you in terms of the COVID protection. And finally, on that PowerPoint, wash your hands and exposed skin before leaving work at the end of the day. You do not want to be carrying the COVID-19 home to the family. On the next PowerPoint, this is for employers now, as you'll notice up there in that green bar across the top of the slide. What you should do is have and prepare and communicate a safe respiratory program, policies, and procedures. And that word prepare includes a very important part of this one. Make sure it's written so that it's available and shared with all of the employees about what you're doing in terms of your respiratory program with policies and procedures, and it becomes part of your health hazard communications program. Second bullet says designate a company contact person responsible for respiratory programs, somebody within the organization who you've designated that's keeping track of PPE that's available and keeping track of all of the cleaning and disinfecting and things that need to be done, checking with crew managers and make sure that those types of things are being done. Third bullet says provide an adequate inventory of respiratory protection devices. I know that there have been runs and on certain things like the nuisance mask and so forth. Hopefully you have a supply and or a vendor who gets these things to you on a regular basis and there's no interruption of that process. The fourth bullet says provide hand soap, single-use towels, and sanitizers in work locations. I think the important part about that one is those single-use towels. You don't want individual employees using the same towelettes or towels to do the cleaning and the disinfecting. They should be using single-use towels when they wash their hands. Also then, the next bullet says conduct and document frequent respiratory training for all staff. Make sure the documentation is done. So even if the crew manager is out there and reminding the employees about COVID-19, how easily it's transmitted among different individuals, make sure you document even a briefing that the crew manager does in the morning before everybody starts work, and obviously document with the employees who have been trained, the topic of the training, the day of the training, and who did that training. Make sure you keep that documentation for a period of time. And actually, I recommend you keep your documentation of training from 3 to 5 years. And the final bullet on that PowerPoint is develop and implement less risky crew transportation methods. This is one, as I said before at the beginning of the presentation, my disclaimer is that this is something that you may not be able to do, but there are a few things you can do. So Amy, if we go on to the next slide. Working with the 6-foot space, I'm sure all of you or most of you have heard about that recommended 6-foot space between individuals, and these also include sanitation recommendations. Crew cab vehicles, which a lot of our firms and companies use, would not limit the occupants in a crew cab situation. Obviously, they're not going to be more than 6 feet apart. But there is one thing you can do, and I've seen these recommendations recently within the last 2 days. Make sure there's good ventilation inside the vehicle, and good air circulation inside the vehicle is important. And as we work towards a little bit warmer weather, it'll be easier to roll the windows down and get better ventilation inside the cab of the vehicle. Keep hard surfaces in the vehicle sanitized frequently. Most of the information I've been reading as of this morning says that the COVID-19 virus can survive on hard surfaces from anywhere 2 to 8 days. Depends on which source of information you've identified and are using. So 2 to 8 days is a fairly long period of time. Third bullet suggests the employees commute to the work site as an option. And I know there's some of our members and some of the people that are represent businesses that are on the webinar today already have employees who report directly to the work site and are not driving in a company vehicle. But again, it's a situation where the management may or may not be able to do that. The fourth bullet is provide hand soap, single-use towels, and sanitizers in work locations. And I'm repeating that because it's the single-use towels is important, and also having those sanitizers and hand soap in work locations in the work vehicle that's out there in the field or at the job site. Encourage frequent hand washing and sanitizing, especially before meals. And there is a recommendation on hydration. And this last bullet talks about providing good liquid refreshment often with single-use drinking cups or vessels. Make sure that your workers stay hydrated. And I think that's the last one I have. So I think, Amy, if you go on, does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? I would just remind you, and Amy told you early on, I am available as a safety advisor to answer your questions if some come up that you think about later.
Thank you so much, Sam. We do have a couple questions. One is, what is the recommendation for wearing a mask during normal movement, not related to PPE required tasks?
You said normal. What was the word after normal?
Normal movement. So just during normal procedures that may not normally require the use of PPE, but in this environment, should they be wearing them anyway?
Well, I think because of the type of work we do and it's outdoors, and for the most part, crews are probably, unless they're working on around, say, for example, a wet salt technology where they're cutting paver blocks or so forth, for the most part, they're going to be 6 feet apart. And unless they're wearing the respirators for protection against dust and so forth that are being generated in the work site, or they have an allergy, they should not necessarily be required outside where we're working at least 6 feet apart and an outside where there's pretty good air ventilation.
Thank you, Sam. Another question is, if employees drive their own vehicles from job site to job site, is that covered under the portal, or does that company assume liability as a company vehicle?
Well, that becomes a legal question that as a safety person, I'm not sure that I would know the answer or would want to state an answer right now, but I'll certainly work with our people at NALP who handle that type of thing, and we can certainly look into that and give that person an answer quickly.
Absolutely, we sure will. One more quick question, Sam, and then I do want to remind everybody we will be getting your questions out to the correct people if they're not being answered during this segment. Would baby wipes count as a single-use towel?
You know, I bought some the other day for my family here where I live and work out of my office here in State College, Pennsylvania. I would look at I know the grocery store considered them to be a sanitizer because I was only allowed to buy 2 of them at the store where I normally shop, at the grocery store where I shop. I think it's an issue of, I know they're recommending items that have alcohol in them, or rubbing alcohol, or isopropyl alcohol. And I don't think baby wipes are high in isopropyl rubbing alcohol. So I would state without, and I'm not quite 100% sure, but I would state that baby wipes probably don't meet the disinfecting types of qualities that we need. But again, that's another question, Amy, I'd like to check on. But I did read the label on what I bought, and they actually said there's no alcohol in the ones that I bought.
Thank you so much, Sam. And again, we will be forwarding you several questions and make sure everybody gets their questions answered. Thank you, Sam. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I'm now going to go ahead and present the next segment to over to Drew Garcia. He is the Vice President of the Landscape Group Rancho Mesa Insurance Services and the NALP Safety and Risk Management Committee Chair.
Thank you, Amy. And first, I just want to thank NALP for taking action on this and putting this webinar together so quickly, and appreciate everybody who's volunteered their time on the panel to get some information out there. Like Sam and Whitney had stated, you know, things are changing rapidly. So the information that was once accurate a day before might be different today. So I think that was a good suggestion by Sam, is to continue to monitor and evaluate the situation so that you know you're getting the most accurate and up-to-date information. On the insurance side, what I wanted to do is just talk briefly about a couple of the questions that we've received, in particular to 3 different types of coverage, instead of trying to elaborate on each type of coverage, not knowing what everybody has, what kind of insurance everybody already has in place. But I'd also like to encourage everyone to focus their attention towards their insurance carriers and agencies at this time. I think if you did a quick web search of your insurance carrier, you'll see that they've probably made a statement at this point, whether it's for workers' compensation or for liability, and you can find some really good information from them online. So I'd encourage you to check out your insurance carrier's website or your insurance agent or broker's website, because information is getting published, it seems like, on the minute now through all these different insurance people. And, you know, with insurance, a lot of this is speculation and a lot of what if scenarios. So I'm going to try and avoid the what if scenario and the what if claim, because we could probably be here all day under those circumstances. So there's a lot of uncertainty revolving around this. So the best thing that you could do would be, you know, under any circumstance, if you have questions about a claim, reach out to your insurance professional, reach out to your carrier and decide what you need to do, whether it's report a claim or ask about how coverage would apply to your particular policy. What we're going to do is start with workers' compensation. And the main question that we get is, are COVID-19 claims covered? And for workers' compensation, coverage for any claim is subject to the jurisdiction and the underlying facts surrounding that claim. So claims are looked at on a case-by-case basis, and that's how they would be looked at for COVID-19 work comp claims. Workers' compensation does cover bodily injury by disease. However, the bodily injury by disease must be caused or aggravated by the condition of employment. If an employee claims a work-related injury for COVID-19, you should absolutely just continue to follow your standard injury reporting and accident investigation process. Nothing should change there. Timely claim reporting is probably most important always, but especially right now with the uncertainty revolving around COVID-19. So if there's any doubt, or if you have any injured employee who is claiming that, you know, they contracted COVID-19 while working, leave that up to your carrier to decide whether or not that is the case. So you would want to just make sure that you tender that claim to the carrier so that they can get working on it as quickly as possible. And then you would want to reach out to your insurance carrier because different jurisdictions and different states interpret bodily injury by disease or occupational disease differently. So it's important that you evaluate and talk to your current carrier about how that's looked at under your jurisdiction. And then following the safety guidelines that Sam had outlined earlier is very important, and the carriers are all pushing us for me on the broker side to tell our clients to just, you know, stay in tune with OSHA and the CDC and the information that they're putting out there to help obviously avoid the claim from even occurring in the beginning. So following that information is very important. But to sum up work comp, you know, it's going to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. Workers' compensation does cover bodily injury by disease, but, you know, the piece there is that it needs to be aggravated or caused by a condition of employment. So that would be the main trigger there. The next one I wanted to talk about was business interruption, which is a property coverage. And, you know, especially when it comes to the liability side and the way that different forms are written by different carriers, policy forms may read differently, and, you know, therefore individual policy assessment is necessary in order to understand if coverage would apply. So business interruption is going to be a loss of revenue or extra expense incurred due to, a physical damage to a covered property. And what's really gray right now is trying to determine if a virus could be considered a physical damage to a property, which would trigger business interruption or business income extra expense. And when you think of manufacturers, restaurants, and gyms, these are types of companies that if their building had a direct physical loss and they needed to relocate or get out during renovation, they're going to see a direct impact on revenue, and income. So you can see where it would really apply there on the lawn and landscape side, because the majority of the work's done, outside. There could be some piece for you're not able to do your work because the client that you serve is under lockdown and you can't get in to do that. But a lot of this claim is going to be triggered off of the way that the form reads. And if you look at the way that ISO, which is the Insurance Services Offices, they're the ones that put together a lot of the insurance forms that carriers use. The business income insurance agreement indicates that direct physical loss or damage as a result of a covered cause of loss is how that claim would be triggered. So in this case for COVID-19, physical damage would mean a direct physical change in the appearance of the covered property. So in order for coverage to be triggered, it would need to be confirmed that the virus actually physically altered the appearance of the property. And, I don't know if there could be possibility for that to be said, but, that would have to be come into play first. And then the second part of that coverage it would have to be a covered cause of loss. And under that policy or under that form, viruses are considered a pollutant, and property policies are going to have a pollution exclusion, and virus is a named biological contaminant exclusion on those policies. So then you would have to get over that hurdle in order for that claim to come true. But these are all just interpretations of that. So the best thing again would be to if you feel like you've had a business interruption claim or there's an issue there, you would tender that claim to the carrier. They would decide ultimately how coverage would apply. But we've had some questions about that. But mainly you can see how that type of loss really would impact manufacturers, mentioned restaurants and gyms, among others. And then the last one I wanted to talk about, and Whitney had mentioned a little bit about it as well, is cyber liability right now, with a lot of people adopting work from home policies. And we have a lot of the workforce that typically is used to working within an office and under standard protocol under the office. They're now having to go and work from home, and it can create a heightened ability for cyber attacks to occur. And Whitney had mentioned a few of the phishing, for example, is one that she had mentioned. But so for everybody to be aware that not only is it a heightened opportunity for cyber criminals to attack right now, but they could possibly be taking advantage of the panic and the shuffling of protocol that all of our businesses are being put under these conditions, and they might be trying to take advantage of those situations to attack our businesses through cyber. And so some of the best practices, techniques that you can implement to hopefully offset some of your cyber liability would be, when you're working from home, two-party authentication. So just having two forms of login with a password and something else. And Whitney had mentioned one that she had used earlier. Updated security requirements onto the computer with malware and virusware to make sure that we're keeping out the people that are trying to phish and get into our system to take advantage of our information. Backing up data, and then obviously having a secured Wi-Fi or Ethernet connection at home so that people aren't able to compromise those connections and get in and get our information. And I can say firsthand, that we've seen, Rancho Mesa, our business has seen phishing emails and suspicious emails come through right now that are coming in at a more frequent rate. So I'd really be aware of information that people are requesting, and just constantly talking about this with all employees so that they know that this could be a time when people are trying to take advantage of a lot of panic and a lot of uncertainty. So mainly wanted to mention those topics: work comp, business interruption, and cyber liability, and would encourage everybody again to reach out to their own insurance carrier or their own insurance broker for further evaluation of your policies, how they read, and ultimately if there would be coverage under any of these circumstances. But at this point, I'm open to taking any questions if there are any, Amy.
Hi, Drew. Thank you so very much for that. In an interest of time, I just want to let everyone know and ensure everybody we will be getting your questions over to Drew following this webinar. We're going to now, though, move forward, and we are going to have Andrew Bray, the NALP VP of Government Affairs, speak now. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, everyone, and thanks for all those that went before me. And I know Paul Frand is coming right after me, and has got some great information. So I'm going to try to be rather brief. I think there's clearly enough demand of materials here that I'm sure we'll do some follow-up, and I'll try to answer any question I can via email, or we'll do another webinar. But briefly, with regards to what Whitney mentioned earlier about the paid family leave and automatic 2 weeks of pay, just so everyone knows, that has passed the House. It has not passed the Senate yet. And while NALP completely supports and acknowledges the need to, infuse some of this capital into the hands of all of the employees throughout our industry, the way the bill is structured right now really makes us as an industry pay it, as the employer is put on the hook to put this cash out during a busy time of the year, during a time of the year that a lot of times you guys are a little tighter for cash. And then the government wants to give you a tax credit next year. So we are working with our champions in the Senate to hopefully modify that and make it so that the government is bearing more of the brunt of the burden rather than you all. I will let you know that I think if this bill does pass, which it will, and even if it passes with as is, which is not the way we prefer, we do believe there is another stimulus package coming that is going to be about 10 times the size of that. And we'll be working to make sure that there are credits and grants and loans, all for our industry, specifically small business, but also incentives for others to be using our services. So we'll keep you up to date with all of that as that is rapidly developing. And I think by the end of the week, I'll be able to tell you a lot more about where both of those packages are. I now wanted to move on to, I think, what has got a lot of people alarmed right now in our industry, aside from the actual virus, is the fact that we are seeing an increasing number of localities, towns, even states going on lockdown mode or shelter in place. And the thing that's important for us to realize in this situation is almost all of these directives are happening at the local level, not even completely at the state level. There are some, exceptions. But at this point in time, it does not look like the president is going to issue some directive like that. That could change, as we said, as every presenter said, that this is a rapidly moving situation. But right now, we believe this is a local issue and will be addressed locally and in some instances at the state. The most prominent one, and seems to be the most extensive one, is one in and around the San Francisco Bay Area. And there are exceptions for essential services. And I think everyone understands essential services to be the grocery store and gas station and things in that nature. But almost every time we see something like this, it also exempts activities involved in maintaining the safety, sanitation, and essential operation of residences and essential businesses. I think what's important to take away there is, as a landscape industry, we are protectors of public health, and we maintain green spaces and property to protect public safety. So when you think about tree removal, when you think about using pest control to treat for mosquitoes and ticks, these are all sort of things that we believe makes us essential and therefore can continue to work in any sort of situation. To assure that we are in this spot, we are working with our partners in the state associations to independently reach out to governors in all 50 states. We're reaching out to localities where this may be impacted. And we're also working through other large organizations such as the Republican Governors Association and Democratic Governors Association to make sure they understand our role. Once again, if anything changes or develops in this, we will let you know. I will tell you this, in the end, it doesn't seem that there is going to be any enforcement at this point. So I would just caution everyone to be smart about the services they're providing. But it is our view as a national association that, our services are essential and necessary during any time, as the pivotal role we play in protecting public health and safety. We have a letter about this, and if you'd like to see it, we'd be happy to give it to you, and you can put your own logo on it if you'd like. We just want to make sure this information is out there and put you on sound footing with regards to performing services. Lastly, quick update on H2B, and I'm going to be real quick here. I think a lot of people saw that there was rumors going around that H2B's closed for the year, or the president's closed the southern border, but the reality is that has not happened to date. There are a few nations that have now put travel restrictions into the U.S., and those are Guatemala and Honduras, I believe. So if you were getting H2B visas out of those two countries, it is unlikely that is going to happen, but that's because of policies within their own country. The policy that is the most troubling at the moment for us is that because of COVID, the consulate in Mexico has drastically reduced their processing capabilities. They have not canceled. So whatever rumor you heard, they have not canceled. But what is happening is because interviews have to happen, that is not possible with some of the social distancing. What they are saying is that if you are a returning worker and can therefore qualify for a waiver from that interview process, you will be processed first and moved to the front of the line. And then as they develop better processes and procedures, they will then begin going through the other visas. That's the status today. I'm not trying to fearmonger. I think there is a strong possibility the southern border does get closed, and I encourage everyone to make preparations in that event. And very lastly, and I'm sorry, Paul, I meant to be done a minute ago, the supplemental rule of the additional 35,000, that has not been released. Because of everything happening, I think this is caught in a logjam, and the Department of Homeland Security views other things as more essential than this supplemental rule. It doesn't mean it's not coming, but just wanted to let you know I think that it will be delayed and delayed past the April 1 date of need. Try to jam everything in there, make myself available to answer as many questions as possible, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And now I'd like to introduce Paul Fran, the CEO and partner of Sun Valley Landscaping. Paul, if you can hear us, you may have muted your line. If you could unmute your line so the audience can hear. While we work out some of the technical difficulties, I'm going to go ahead if Andrew is still available. We have a question or two for Andrew if you're able to. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Andrew.
Hello, can you guys hear me now?
Oh, are you there? Wonderful. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Andrew. We can hear you, Paul.
Well, all right. Well, as luck would have it, the power went out at my office about 5 minutes ago. So, you got to take each moment as it comes. Thank you for all being here. I was encouraging everybody to take a brief second and take a deep breath here. I'm going to share with you just some of my experience. I'm definitely not a therapist. I'm definitely not an economic expert, but it's really important for us as business leaders and landscape professionals to handle this in the best way we can. So take a deep breath, realize we're all in this together, and this does in fact suck, but we're going to get through it. So I'm going to start with just my own experience on making decisions right now. So I'm just going to ask you guys to really focus on your own mental health at this point. So we need to take some moments of pause. We need to not watch the news 24/7. And we need to just try to be decisive, but not with panic. So I'm focusing on what I can control right now, which is what I'm going to share with you guys. So first of all, I just want to give a big shout out to a lot of you know Ashley Ninneman, my general manager, and just our team in general. They've handled this with exceptional grace and focus and decisiveness. I'm just really proud, as I'm sure you guys are of your teams. Sam covered the hygiene and sanitation part. I would just encourage you guys to make sure that you're training that in English and in Spanish. We've had some of our Spanish speaking guys not follow all of our protocols, and I think a lot of that's just on a communication aspect. So there's resources on the website attached to this webinar that give you that in Spanish. One thing we haven't mentioned yet that we're doing at Sun Valley is keeping business units separate. So what I mean by that is trying to keep all of us within our company separated. That way, if someone on one crew gets COVID-19, we can quarantine them and not have to shut down our company. So what that looks like for us is we are doing no meetings in person. All meetings, even daily huddles, are done via phone call. We've canceled all face-to-face meetings and are using Zoom internally for managers. And then as far as our crews, the crews essentially are being set up to operate remotely. So they will not come into the office. We've bought porta potties to leave outside of our shop with hand washing stations so that they can use those when they come and go. And then they're keeping their equipment loaded as much as possible so that, again, they don't have to come in the shop and they certainly don't need to come in the office. Our office staff, many of them are working from home. Fortunately, that was something we had done before this, but if people need some thoughts or best practices, you can shoot me an email on how to do that. Our supply yards, we have a supply yard where we sell materials. We've implemented some glove policies for the staff there. We're still accepting cash and accepting people coming here, but we're utilizing a little window to keep them out of that cashier station. And then as far as our sales staff, just really encouraging them to keep distance when they go to people's homes. And we're letting our clients know kind of the new normal when we go there. You know, basically we'll be outside and we won't come in your home and we can, you know, operate this safely. So I think I'll skip to our communication with our clients, and Sam did such a good job on kind of the hygiene. I think everybody's getting that. And again, our stuff is on that website if you guys want to see it. So we've sent a few emails to clients. I will just say now is not the time to be kind of silent during this. I know as business owners, we're getting 100 emails about what everybody's doing, but keep in mind, a lot of our clients don't do business with 100 people. So your email may be one of only a few that they're getting. And you are somebody that comes to their home or comes to their place of business. So it's important that you communicate with them. Basically, we're sharing with them how we're being safe, what we're doing with our team, how we're handling in-person meetings, which is just basically keeping space and staying outside. We are offering now half-price delivery on our materials. So kind of that similar deal you're seeing with restaurants, trying to get people their mulch, getting their stone, the things that they're going to need to get spring going. And then we're really talking about, which is our purpose at Sun Valley, which is allowing others to enjoy the outdoors as much as we do. We're sending a lot of communication about this. So I don't know about in your community, but in my community, when I was out for my run last night, there's hundreds of people outside walking. The grass is about to get green. Flowers are going to bloom. There's buds on the trees. And so people are going to want to be outside. So we're really trying to celebrate that with them, that is one safe place you can be. And I'll run through these last parts quickly. I know we're running short on time. So for sales and production, obviously, we're going to take a hit. No one knows what that's going to be. We're focusing on really watching our leads and our sales. So we used to really do that well every week. We're doing that every day. We're looking at our backlog. The most important thing I would share, I guess, is just talk to your clients and try to be a good partner with them. We sponsor our minor league baseball team, so we service that property there, and their season is, not starting on time or we're uncertain. So talking with places like that or hotels or restaurants that we may service. Again, no one knows, don't panic. A couple of people in my peer group have identified some people that with low interest rates may be pushing some projects forward. So obviously that's going to be case by case, and maintenance, as we learned in the last recession we had, is something that people are still in general going to need to do: mow lawns, fertilize, that kind of thing. So we're looking at our budget with a few kind of austerity measures that are tiered. So this is, again, just my experience. I'm trying to do things unemotionally and before they happen, so that when certain things do happen, that decision's already been made. So maybe step one is getting rid of a networking event or something that's not crucial to sales or production. Step 5 may be, some of those things we were just looking at, which are scary, but we have to face them, which is layoffs and things like that. And then if you haven't already, just touch base with your bank. Banks are fine. The banks have liquidity. You don't need to pull all of your cash out of your line of credit. But cash is going to be king. And obviously those with strong balance sheets will get through this better. So keep those relationships in mind. We've talked about insurance, safety, HR, legal, and now banking. And I think we're all epidemiology experts now too. And then I just wanted to end with a little bit of hope, I guess. So we're entrepreneurs. We do hard things all the time, and we can certainly get through this. Our team and our families and our association really need us to be strong right now. So for yourself, focus on the power of the outdoors. Get outside. Remember why you started to do this. The grass will green up and people will be happy to be outside, and that's something I'm super grateful for, that we're in this business. So just provide your team a lot of that mental and physical health components, because that's something that being outside can give you. So, and finally, just don't go it alone. I know, like many of you, I've been talking to contractors and people all over the country, and I'm thankful and grateful for my mentors. And I would just ask you guys, reach out and keep the hope. We don't know what's going to happen, and we're all in this together. So, and this is a cheesy thing, but I'm sure you guys have heard it. But smiles and hope are just as contagious right now. So that's important. That's all I got.
Paul, thank you so much for that. And I want to thank all of our panelists for the time they took today for this presentation. I want to remind everybody that it will be available, this webinar, on our coronavirus webpage. In addition to the webinar, we will also have the PowerPoint presentation made available, which will have several links, including the NALP letter on the lockdown shutdown, available, that link. The webpage also has information about future webinars in this series and a lot of helpful information. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day, and thank you again.